Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Central Leadership Skills podcast. You know what I always say, especially when I'm being introduced on the road, it doesn't matter who I am. What matters is the value you're going to get from the table. So you got a brief introduction for Jim Marshall, a lot about him already. Let's get started. Jim, I thank you very much for coming on, reviewing some of your work. I'm challenged by it, and I think our leadership will be challenged by it. So thank you very much for showing up with us today.
Hi, Glenn. Thank you.
All right. I want to just start off with kind of a simple, it's not simple, but what do people need to know about you that maybe is not in common or ordinary, but they just need to maybe know about you? To say, okay, this is
Right.
something different about Jim.
Okay, I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena, which greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I constructed a revolutionary practical philosophic system called Septemics and published in the book Septemics Hierarchies of Human Phenomena.
Okay. Now, here's my question for you. You have on the website, you have some breakout chapters where people can get a sample of what it is. I have an idea, but share with us Septemics. What
Okay,
50,000 foot
Septemics
view,
is
real
a,
quick.
Septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many phenomena related to human beings occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word septemics means of or pertaining to 7.
Hmm.
Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. There are 35 such scales, each of which is unique, and between them, they span the spectrum of human experience, by which I mean any situation that occurs in the life of a human will be analyzed successfully by one or more of these scales. Most situations, you will find that there are multiple scales which apply to the situation. So
Oh,
you can
when
use the situation, use the book to resolve a situation.
So when I was going through this and trying to get a handle on it, all of a sudden it started relating to me to music. 7 note scales, and if you're talking about just do minor and augmented, all those things, but 7 major notes in every scale. The range of octaves can stretch out to be way more than 35. And so I started relating that to music. How far off track was I to say, okay, if this happens here, then it probably has rang here and here in different spots that shows where I am as a human. How far off am I? Did I misunderstand the whole process? Did I relate it to the wrong thing?
I would say that the fact that there are 7 notes in a scale of Western music and the fact that there are 7 levels in each of these 35 scales is accidental.
Ah,
Because if you study Eastern music, is what they call microtonal. They have more than 7 notes. Now, there are also certain scales in Western music that do not have 7 notes. There's a pentatonic scale that has 5,
five.
and there's what they call a whole tone scale, which has 6. So there are scales that don't have 7. So I think that's
Okay.
just accidental.
Okay. Still, though, in your work, because some of your background stated that you did some work in music and studied that. How much does
Yeah,
music apply to a septemic?
not very much.
Okay, cool.
Septemics is a separate subject. It's a separate subject. It's a new subject. And I can truthfully say, as a highly literate person, there has never been a book like this before.
Hmm.
Although, what I can say to give people a handle on it is each of the 35 scales is expressed in what you might call a table or a spreadsheet. And each of those 35 tables is comparable to the periodic table of elements, which is commonly used in chemistry and physics. Now, before Dmitri Mendeleev invented the periodic table, the subject of chemistry existed, but he revolutionized it by taking all the elements and putting them on one page in correct relationship to one another. And of course, it's been used that way ever since. As we discovered additional elements, we just added them in the places where he predicted they would be. So each of these 35 scales is like a periodic table, but instead of being for elements, it's for each of the 35 corresponding subject headings. And if you would like me to read you the names of the 35 scales, you'll see what I mean as far as the subject matter.
Yeah, maybe that's where I missed the boat. Go ahead, if you will.
Okay, okay. So there are 24 scales which apply primarily to individuals and 11 which apply primarily to groups. The 11 individual scales are the scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, the scale of reaction, and the group scales are the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics.
Okay, so that breaks
So
that down a little bit. Yeah,
you
go
can
ahead.
see, you can see that I've pretty much covered what most people would think of as human phenomena, and that's why this subject is universally applicable. Because each scale is unique, there's no redundancy or overlap here. By the time you'll see if you read it and study it and use it, it covers everything that a person is going to find himself in. And so it's very helpful to people.
Okay, so one of the skills was the skill of motivation. Okay, how is that beneficial for me as a
Yes,
leader to understand that skill? Can you tell me the benefits of that?
yes, tremendous benefits. One of the most important things to know is motivation. This is how the police solve crimes. If there's no motive, you're not a suspect. Okay? I've worked it out to determine that there are only 7 basic human motivations. Of course, there are thousands of motivations, but they are subsets of these. Now, knowing your own motivation clarifies your mind, and knowing other people's motivation is extremely helpful. What's more valuable than knowing a person's motivation? In other words, you can look at the scale and you could say, what's my motivation toward my mother? What's my motivation toward my wife? What's my motivation toward my son? What's my motivation toward my girlfriend? And so forth. And it clarifies where you are with that person. Now, you have to realize that part of the power of this is once your level or another person's level on any scale, you then can move up one level. Because this is natural law, if a person is at a given level, he can always attain the next level up, which is tremendously helpful because it solves the gradient problem, which I can discuss later. But to finish
Mm.
answering your question about motivation, you can say, what is my boss's motivation toward me? What is my girlfriend's motivation toward me? What is my father-in-law's motivation toward me? And when you nail that, that tells you a lot. For example, the lowest motivation of all is revenge.
Oh,
You want to have people around you who are motivated by revenge? I don't think so. So if you spot a person who's motivated by revenge, that's a person you want to stay away from. That's a dangerous person.
hmm.
So right there, you can save yourself a lot of trouble. And I can guarantee you, this book, this book in one form or another has been around for 26 years because the original transcript was released in early 96. And I've been getting feedback on it for 26 years. And I can tell you, guaranteed, this book can save you from catastrophes, disasters, bankruptcies, indictments, all kinds of terrible things can be prevented by having this book. Because when you can analyze what is going on with a person, that tells you who you should be around and who you shouldn't be around. For example, the lowest basic purpose of all of the 7 is the purpose to destroy. That was Hitler's purpose. That was Pol Pot's purpose. That was Charles Manson's purpose. You don't want to be around those people. Now, if you find somebody like Mother Teresa, her purpose was transcendence. Okay? there's nothing dangerous about a person whose purpose is to transcend. So of course in between there are 5 other objectives, which are the person's basic purposes. So this is extremely useful to the reader, and it was designed to be that way. I had a long, successful career as a human development engineer, working with hundreds of people over many thousands of hours. And I have gone from helping people by the hundreds to helping people by the millions with this book. Because if you have this book, once you have the book, you don't need anything else to use it. You don't need to take a class. You don't need to hire anybody. You don't need to go to a therapist. You don't need to spend any money. The book stands on its own. It's designed to be user-friendly for the average reader to unravel whatever situations he has in his life. And I know it works because I've seen it work for 26 years.
I
And
love it.
not only by college graduates, anybody who can read English and wants to improve himself can use this book.
I love it. And love the idea that you had part of it posted on your website. Just real quick, and we'll come back to it. How do
Yes,
people get this book? How do they get it?
very easy to find this book. I invite you to go to Septemics.com, and there you will find not only how to buy the book, but you'll see what readers have said about it, what journalists have written about it, what the reviews are, and of course, parts of the book, as you just mentioned. It's easy to find. If you put the word Septemics into a search engine, you'll get hundreds of responses, including all the people who are selling the book, such as Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, the publisher, Author House. It's very easy to find this book and buy it. And it's in hardbound, softbound, and ebook. Of course, the ebook is very inexpensive. So
Right.
you don't have to invest a lot of money in this.
Okay, so now we'll come back. We'll let everybody get a chance to write that information down. It'll be in the show notes, of course. But I want to go back and because you're starting to lay out how it works, okay, and then you started also to point out why it works so well because now we have a basic understanding of the levels that we sit at. And each of the different
Uh-huh.
categories, the levels 1 through 7 are different, or they got to be different because
Yeah.
transcend cannot be in some of the others. To have that level being transcended. So, how did you do the research for this? How did you build the ideal? Okay, you have 28
Okay.
years of
Okay.
education behind you.
Yes. Okay, so let me explain this. First of all, I was a born polymath. I have no memory of a time when I was not intensely interested in learning everything that's taught in every university. I
Hmm.
started school when I was 3, and I have been involved in education one way or another my entire life. So I was searching, even as a boy, I was reading to find out what's this all about. Now, by the time I had my bachelor's degree, I pretty much knew what was in the mainstream. In other words, I knew all the main subjects: mathematics, physics, chemistry, history, and so forth. And I found gaping holes in between all of this. In other words, there were all kinds of things that were not covered in the mainstream, that are not taught in any university. So then I got involved in studying alternative subjects to find out
Hmm.
maybe they knew something, and I learned an awful lot. Now, I thought I was going to be an ordinary engineer working with physical objects like electrons and airfoils and motors and things. But by the time I had my bachelor's degree, I realized I wanted to engineer the human psyche. I became a human development engineer. And as I was working with my clients over the years, I started observing that my clients would improve in ways that were predictable to me. Now, I
Hmm.
never told this to anyone, but I made notes. And as the years went by, I started to develop scales. In other words, I observed that my clients, without knowing it, were going up scales. So I would know a certain scale. I would spot the client on that scale without saying anything to anybody. And then I would know that when he improved, he was going to go up to the next level up, and he would. So what was happening as the years went by, I got better and better because I knew what improvement the guy was going to have before he had it, even though I didn't tell him anything. I never told anything to my clients. I worked by Socratic dialogue, meaning I would ask the right question. Now, by 95, I had about 32 scales that varied in length between 3 and 7 levels. And there was one scale in particular that I had that had 6 levels that I absolutely knew was correct from using it continuously for decades. Now, in
Mm-hmm.
95, I realized it had a 7th level. And when I inserted that level into the 6th level scale, the scale manifested mathematically. Now, I have a mathematical mind. I took 26 semesters of math and loved every minute of it.
Wow.
When I saw that it had mathematical aspects to it, I realized this must be natural law, because if you study science or any type of natural law, there's mathematics embedded in it, like the Bayesian theorem.
Yeah.
And of course, there are innumerable examples of this. Once it's mathematical, it's inarguable. In other words, it's natural law. It has nothing to do with me. I just stumbled across this. So when I looked at this scale, the 6th level scale that became a 7th level scale, and I saw the mathematics in it, the implications jumped out at me, because the whole point of mathematics is the implications. You start with a formula or an equation, and you work with it, and you develop it into what you want. For example, that's how Einstein developed E equals mc squared, the most
Right.
famous equation on Earth. He did it
Yep.
mathematically, okay? And this was
Okay.
demonstrated to me in physics class in college. It's very specific. So when I saw that, I said, whoa, this is big. This was beyond anything that I had anticipated. I was just helping my clients using what I knew, using biofeedback and Socratic dialogue. Now, when I saw this scale was natural law, I asked myself, I wonder how many of these other scales are actually 7-level scales that were not developed all the way, because I wasn't developing anything. I was just working with my clients. So then I inspected all these other scales, these other 32 scales or whatever I had at the time. And because I know what I was looking for, I found the remaining levels very quickly.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
each of them, as they went to 7 levels, manifested mathematically. So in a few months, I had about 32 7-level scales that were all natural law. Then I said, whoa, this is big. This can help people. I need to write a book and get this out to the people of Earth. So I wrote the original transcript in December of 95, and I started giving it to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees. And they were all very favorably impressed by it. So then I said, okay, this is what I think it is, and I'm going to work on this. So I worked on this book for 25 years, okay? Starting in 95, it was published about a year and a half ago. That's 25 years before I published it. Now, what was I doing for 25 years? First, I had to discover the phenomena. Most of that was done by 95. However, the scales themselves were there, but there were aspects of them that I didn't know. For example, I needed to know, what axis is this? In other words, what is this scale measuring? That is not obvious. For example,
Yeah.
if you take the scale of equanimity, is extremely important. 95% of the problems that people have with one another is because one or both have a lack of equanimity. So the scale presented itself in verbiage that looked like maturity. I thought it was a scale of maturity. But as I worked with it, I came to realize, no, that's how it looks, but the underlying aspect is that this is equanimity. So that became the scale of equanimity, even though if you read the levels, they sound like maturity. So for example, a little kid, it's very easy to upset a little kid because he has very little equanimity. Of course, an infant is immature. So as a person goes up the scale of equanimity, he becomes what we think of as mature.
Okay.
So I had to it took me years to figure out that this was a scale of equanimity. So I had to do that with all of the scales, with all 35 scales. Now you have to realize, 35 scales, by the time I published it, I had 35 scales. Each has 7 levels. That's 245 different levels. each of which had to be verified. So that's a lot of work. Now, after I had the phenomena, I had to engineer the practical philosophic system, and that took a couple of decades to work all of that out. Then the other challenge on top of all of that is I had to present it in a way that would be digestible or comprehensible to the average reader. Now, think about this. When Einstein presented the general and specific theories of relativity, he did it in academic papers. He was writing for other physicists and other mathematicians. He made no attempt to explain this to the general public. That is typically what happens in the scientific world. Similarly, with the father of physics, Sir Isaac Newton, he determined or derived the three laws of motion. But in order to facilitate it, he had to develop calculus, which was in a book famously known as the Principia. Now, the Principia was not intended for the average reader. It was intended for other scholars, mathematicians, physicists, okay? So again, he was not writing for the general public. So I had to take a new subject based on natural law that had mathematical underpinnings and write it in a way that the average reader would be able to understand. That took an enormous amount of work. It's an 86,000 word book. So I had to go literally word by word and ask, how is the reader going to accept this? How is the reader going to interpret this? Is he going to get it? Let me give you an example. There's a scale of sexuality, okay? Level 2 on that scale, which is a very high level that most people never get to, is a level I call take it or leave it. Now you could say that's not a very elegant way of saying it, and I agree, but it explains it perfectly. There are people who are so advanced in the level of sexuality that they can take it or leave it. There's no compulsion there. If they're having it, it's fine. If they're not having it, it's fine. If they meet a new girlfriend, it's fine. If they don't, it's fine too. If they break up with somebody, that's fine too. They don't care because it's take it or leave it. They can take it or leave it. So that's what I call the level. Now, people know exactly what you mean. People who can read English know what you mean when you say take it or leave it. So that's what I called it. But I had to do that for 245 different levels. What I can tell you is absolutely, let me just finish this thought.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I could bet my life that the scales are correct. But you might want to quibble with how I express them. And I have had discussions with people about what word to use to call a level. Because naming the phenomena is a different thing from knowing what it is. So from a writer's point of view, this was a very difficult and complex assignment. And I inserted glossaries in front of not only every chapter, even in front of the introduction. There's a glossary. So I'm defining my terms to help the reader to know exactly what I mean.
I tell you, it's deep, solid, hard-working book. My question that came up earlier. So, why is this important? What I want to just dive into just a little bit. I think this might illustrate why it's important. You were talking about one of the scales, and you said that you could predict what was going to be that person's next step by the questions you were asking or the results that you were seeing. Can you give us a little bit of, is it questions that are, or is it based upon observation? Is it a question that's there all the time? It's going to be there that everyone could ask? Or how does that question part work? Because that's what's going to make it significant.
It's all about observation. Once you know the scales, and you have to realize, before I was in the idea of Septemics, I was developing these scales for decades before I ever decided to write a book. So I had these scales, chunks of scales. They weren't 7-level scales, but they were presented to me by my clients. I would observe a guy go from A to B, and then I would observe another guy go exactly from A to B. So that's why I realized these were empirical. These were scales that the clients were going up. So, for example, I know the basic purpose of every president of the United States going back as far as Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And in fact, I know the basic purposes of some of the presidents before that who I studied, such as Lincoln, Washington, and Jefferson. So I just observe these people. So if I observe a person, I can spot a person on any one of these 35 scales pretty easily because I know the scales. And anybody can do that. Any person who knows this material can use it. So it's extremely helpful. It helps you to find out, is this a person who I can deal with or not? Is this a person I want to be around or not? It's very helpful in life. Now, let me say something. Each of these 35 scales provides the user with an infallible way of determining the salutariness or beneficialness of any group, individual, or activity. If the group, individual, or activity moves the persons up the scales, it's beneficial or positive. If it moves them down, it's detrimental or negative. More importantly, just finding out what level you or another person or some group is at is by itself enlightening and beneficial. For example, if you find your basic purpose, that changes your whole life. There are 7 basic purposes. Once you know your basic purpose, you ignore the other 7. You know what your life is about. You're not about these other 7 things. Your basic purpose is this one thing, and it makes living much easier because you know what you're about. For example, I was telling you I know the basic purposes of all the presidents of the United States because I observe them. I read
Right.
their books. I listen to their speeches. People tell you their levels. It's no big secret figuring this out. So, for example, take Donald Trump. I understand Donald Trump. You know why? I know his basic purpose. Nothing he does surprises me. A lot of people are surprised by him, whether they like him or don't like him. They're surprised by a lot of things he does. I'm never surprised by Donald Trump because I know what he's about. I know his basic purpose. I'm not going to tell you what it is because that would be unethical. I never tell anybody what his level is, and nor should anyone else. What you should do is try to get somebody to find it himself. But the good news is it's not hard. Let me give you an example. Let's say you
Okay.
have a parent. This parent has a kid who's having trouble in school. There's a scale of scholarship. This kid is somewhere on that scale. So you can take the kid and say, look, let's say the kid's old enough to read the book, is like 12. Okay, you have him read the glossary, then you have him look at the scale and ask him, where are you on the scale? And he'll say, I'm here at level 5. Because it will wrap around him. It will not be hard for him to spot this. Then you say, okay, let's move you to level 4. And when you do that, he will be able to do it, and you will have made him a better student. It's that simple.
So
Now,
reading
I
that,
tell you in that chapter with specificity how to make a better scholar. You find the level the person's at, and I tell you in great detail exactly what to do to move the person up the scale.
so we're,
Every
go ahead, I'm
parent
sorry.
can use this to make his student improve, as an example. Now, the third thing I want to tell you is this. Once the actual level, you can improve that person by moving them up one level at a time. Now, this is a major step forward for society because I have solved the gradient problem. Most people can see that they have problems, but they don't know what to do about them because they don't know what the gradient is. So I just gave you an example with the parent, right? The kid's at a certain level. He says that, let's say he's at level 5. A kid at level 5 on the scale of scholarship is going to have some trouble in school, okay? And if you move him up to 4, he will be a better student. Now, if you tried to move him to 3 or 2 or 1, you would fail.
Because
If
he's
you
not ready.
don't
He hasn't,
move him
okay.
up, he
Yes.
he might fall down to 6, and that's even worse. And if he falls down to 7, he'll probably drop out of school. This is very helpful because I have narrowed it down to 7 things on all 35 spectrum, all 35 scales. There is a 7-level spectrum. This is important because let's say I stop a guy in the street and I say, what's your mother-in-law's motivation toward you? He's going to say to me, what are you talking about? How can I possibly know that? There could be millions of motivations. He doesn't know that there are only 7 basic motivations. If I had that guy look at this scale, he would be able to say, I can see she's right here at this level.
Okay.
It explains why you're having trouble with somebody or why you're getting along with somebody. It tells you with specificity. So
Huh.
I have to say, the data in this book are vital for every human being and can help you to achieve your goals faster and easier by explaining what might otherwise seem to be inexplicable or random. If someone
Okay.
were to invite you to a rendezvous, you would certainly expect him to tell you the exact location and perhaps also how to get there. Needless to say, it's very difficult to get somewhere if you don't know where you are, don't know where you're going, and don't know how to get to your destination. Now, this sounds idiotic, but most people do this regularly,
All
so
the
much
time.
so that it's considered normal. Most people don't know where they are, where they're going, or how to get there. And this book absolutely solves that problem. And this is across any possible area. In other words, whether you're talking about romance, politics, finances, health, career, anything, this book will address it and it will tell you with specificity where you are, and then you know how to improve because you go up one level. You can never skip a level. And that's not bad news, that's good news because you're going to go to the next level up. That becomes your target. And you will be able to do that.
Okay.
If you don't know the gradients, it's hard to get ahead. Every good teacher, counselor, facilitator, therapist in the world knows about gradients, right? I've worked as a trainer. You can't just give a guy 100 pounds and say work out. That's not good training. You have to work with a guy. You have to make a guess, say, okay, I'm going to guess this guy can curl 20 pounds. So you ask him to curl 20 pounds on one arm and see how he does. He might say, this is too hard. I can only do about 3 of these. You say, okay, fine. Let's do 15. And he might be able to do, let's say, 12 of those. You say, good. That's it.
Good.
We're going to work with 15. Then you have to find out how many. Okay, how many can you do? He says, after 12, it gets really hard. And I'll say, okay, let's stick with 12 for now. Okay, so do 3 sets of 12 reps with 15 pounds on each arm every day. You see, you're giving him the gradients. And by
Yes.
doing that,
Yeah.
he's not going to hurt himself. He's not going to get too sore. He's not going to get discouraged. That's what good training is. And that's what I did with my clients in whatever context they were working. So I would, for example, I had clients whose first language was not English. I had people who came to me from Europe. Okay. So I knew that their level of literacy was not high. Now, most people think either you're literate or you're illiterate. No, there are
No.
7 levels of literacy.
I believe.
Okay,
Yeah.
not 2. So
I can see
I
that.
would have to ascertain the person's level of literacy. And I could do that pretty easily by talking to the person for a while. So then I would know how to speak to this client. If I had a guy who had a master's degree in English, I would not have to worry about talking to him. Okay, I could just say whatever I wanted to say and he would get it because he knows the language well. He's high on the scale of literacy. And he might have terrible emotional problems or relationship problems, but literacy is not his problem. With these other people for whom English was a second language, I had to be very careful to not use a word that they did not understand. So
Sure.
I was able to work with them and help them, but again, it was because I was using the right gradient. So
You know,
this book tells you the gradients for these 35 axes.
it would seem difficult to be able to draw the line between each one of those scales and say, okay, this scale is just this. Because, like I said, for example, literacy, or I forgot the exact words, but how I can't. Maybe this person has their master's and they got great communication skills and how that, but because of their attitude, this would actually be lower on the scale, wouldn't you think?
You have to realize there are 35 scales.
Right.
The
So,
norm that you find in the human race, and again, I've been observing this for longer than I was working with the book. The
yes.
norm is some people are high in one thing and low on another thing. For example, on the scale of human ability, Einstein was at level 1, which is genius, okay? But if you look at the scale of basic purposes, he was not at the top of that scale. He was probably somewhere around level 2, 3, or 4, okay? He certainly was not at level 1, and he certainly was not at 5, 6, or 7. I know enough about him to say that. Now, if I wanted to do an analysis on Einstein, I'd have to read an biography. I don't think there is an autobiography, but I would have to study the man, and then I could tell you with specificity where he is on the scale of basic purposes. But it's not going to be level one. So, for example, I'll have a client come in, right, who he owns a beautiful house, he makes a ton of money, okay, he owns his own corporation, but this guy has trouble with relationships. I would work on that, and he would be at a low level on the scale of relationships. So, for example, if a person has trouble with relationships, you get this book, there's a scale of relationships. There's a scale of permeation. Permeation is what causes love. There's a scale of allegiance. When relationships deteriorate, it's because allegiance decays. There is a scale of sexuality. If you're not compatible on the scale of sexuality, you cannot have a romantic relationship with that person. You maybe can be friends, but there has to be compatibility. I'm not saying you have to be at the same level, but you have to be compatible. And this is something, of course, I explain in that chapter.
In the book. Yep. Okay.
Right there off the top of my head, anybody who has relationship problems, he can look at those 4 scales, and one or more of them, he will find himself on that level right away. As soon as he looks at it, it might take a couple of minutes, but it's not going to be hours, okay? Usually, what typically happens is a person looks at it and he finds a bracket in seconds. He'll say, I can see I'm either a 3 or 4. Okay, so you see you've thrown out 5 levels. Then you can narrow it down and let's say, okay, let's figure out what is it? Is it 3 or is it 4? And after a while, he'll say, yeah, I can see I'm at level 4. Great. Okay. Now you know where you are. Let's move you to level 3. And he will be able to do that.
Okay.
So it's a foolproof system because you're asking the person to do something he can do because it's the next level up.
Okay, cool. I like that a lot. That's a good educational piece. Something you said earlier, though, is I'd like for you to explain a little bit deeper for us if we have time. Now, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. But you mentioned that it would not be within ethical reasons to say what somebody else's purpose is. But if I'm a leader, don't I need to be able to identify and connect with my team and say, hey, I understand where you're going? Just like on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I know where that person's at based upon those needs. I would think that might be the same thing in a person's purpose. If I know where you are, which I like I said, you don't have to tell anybody else, but if I know where you are and I can have that discussion that demonstrates to you that I know where you are, is that unethical for me to use that information there, or is that what you were saying?
Okay, so what I said was telling somebody his level is unethical. I never tell the level of any living person. Unless you're going to tie me to a radiator and beat me with a club, I'm not going to tell you Barack Obama's level on any scale, although I know what they are. I'm not going to do it. It's not ethical. It's not fair. What helps people is to get the person himself to figure it out. That is what therapy is about. That is what my job was in human development. And I know it works in this context because it's natural law. And so the person will look at this table and will say, yes, I see, I'm right here. Let me tell you a story. I had a friend who I knew very well for most of my life. And we got into a discussion of politics. This is decades ago. So I had an early version of this book. And so I opened up to the scale of government, because we were talking about government. And I said, take a look at this. And I handed him the scale of government. I did not say a word. I just handed it to him. So he looked at it and he pointed to a level. He said, I'm right there. He found his level without me even suggesting that he find his level. That's how easy it is, because it's natural law. In other words, the person will orient himself into these 35 scales. Now, that's an example where, now this guy doesn't have a college degree, okay? And I wasn't asking him what level are you at, but he found it immediately without saying a word. So that's different. I did not tell him he was at that level. He simply found it. And I've done this many times. So what's unethical is telling the person. So, for example, I talked about a parent who has a child who's having scholastic problems. You don't tell the kid you're at level 5. Don't do that. He has to find it himself. Now, the beauty of this book is that I've done the heavy lifting. I worked out what the 7 levels are. And because of that, the kid will look at it and it will say, yeah, I can see I'm maybe there at 3 or 4. Okay, good. Look at it some more and read the chapter and see if you can tell me. And after he does that, he'll say, I can see. I'm described here at level 4. Great. Congratulations. You found your level. Now we will move you to level 3. And I can guarantee he will be able to do that. I can't tell you how long it's going to take or how much work will be involved in it, because that is an individual thing. Some scales are harder to move on than others. Some of them move very quickly. And it depends on the person. But he knows where he's going now. You follow me?
Yep,
And
gotcha.
so this works across the board, no matter what you find. Now, as far as evaluating people, that's the power of the book. Let's say you're a boss, right? You've got 10 people under you. You would probably be wise to evaluate these people against this book. Figure out, what is Joe's basic purpose? What is Mary's basic purpose? What is Francine's basic purpose? Then you know what that person is about. I'm not saying tell them. I'm saying you yourself.
And you help them
So I
find it.
will bump into people. You could help them find it, yes. You could do that. But I bump into people all the time and I spot them on these levels very quickly. I'll give you an example. When Barack Obama came on the scene, most Americans had no idea who he was. This was a guy who was suddenly elected senator. Now, the people of Illinois knew who he was because they elected him senator. 2 years after he became senator, he started running for president. Now, the people in the other 49 states, most of us, maybe 95% of us, had no idea who this guy was. All we knew he was a senator. Now he's running for president, so now we have to vote for him. We had to find out. So I took it upon myself, this unknown quantity, somebody I had never heard from, and I studied him. I listened to his speeches. I watched him. And very quickly, I was able to determine his basic purpose. And that informed me what type of a person he is, who he is, what he is about. Okay? Now, again, I'm not going to tell you who I voted for, and I'm not going to tell you his basic purpose. But I used it to analyze the person and to become informed about, is this somebody I want to vote for or not? And you have to realize, again, people are high on some levels and low on others. Like, for example, Bill Clinton is a brilliant politician. In fact, he's a brilliant person. He's a Rhodes Scholar. I've listened to him speak many times, both in speeches and extemporaneously. The man is smart. He's educated. He's articulate. But when you come to the area of sexuality, he has some kind of a serious problem. It's widely known that he's a rapist. He's a serial adulterer. He got in all kinds of trouble with girlfriends who sued him. That's how he wound up getting impeached, because he wound up doing things in court that were not ethical, and that's what they impeached him for.
Right.
Now, all I'm saying is he's high on some levels, low on other levels. Even his opponents admit he's a shrewd politician.
Right.
He knows government, okay? Now, a lot of people despise the man, especially women, because of his behavior. But that's a different thing.
It
So
is.
you have to realize that, yeah, you should know where the people around you are on all of these scales. And I have to tell you, every human being is somewhere on all 35 of these scales. That information is just sitting there waiting for you to access it. Now, look,
And,
when you go out with your car, there's all kinds of signage, right? There's double lines, dotted lines, no left turn, red light, green light, left turn signals, speed limits, no U-turn. All of those signs tell you how to drive safely. And if you don't obey them, you're going to get in big trouble. You could kill somebody, including yourself. You could also get your license taken away. You can get tickets. So there are laws you have to follow. The signs. You can't just go across a double yellow line. It's against the law. It causes serious problems. That is
right.
what this book is like. Each one of these scales is a roadmap for the corresponding area of life. I read you the 35 areas. So
Right.
the area of thought, there are 7 levels of thought. You can look at a person and say, I just did that today. I was viewing somebody and I was seeing how his thinking was at a specific level. I didn't say
Hmm.
anything, but I could analyze it. Now, the subtext of this book is analysis, prediction, and management of human affairs. Using this book, you can easily, swiftly, accurately analyze people. And because of that, you can predict what they're going to do. And as a result of that, you can manage human affairs. So, for example,
Hmm.
I have been in a position throughout my life of hiring and firing people, okay? And when I would hire somebody, I knew a lot of this information even before I wrote the book. I told you I had bits and pieces, chunks of these skills. And I would evaluate people. I would look at a guy and say, this guy is smart, but he has this problem. I don't want this guy. And I'll give you a story. I once had 2 women who were both applied for the same job. And they were both qualified for the job. And I spent time talking to them. So finally, the final day came and I made an appointment with both of them to show up for me to tell them who I was hiring and who I wasn't. I thought they deserved a meeting and an explanation. So the first woman comes in. I said, I decided I'm using this other woman. Now she knew this other woman, which I didn't even know. It just turned out they knew one another. She said to me, and I quote, you mean you chose her over me?
Hmm.
I didn't say to her, but I thought, that's why I chose her, because she doesn't have that attitude. So I hired this other woman. Working with her was like a dream. The whole time she worked for me, I never had any trouble of any time. She was on time. She did her job. She knew her job. It was wonderful working with her. So I was smart enough to see, even though they were both qualified for the job and they both had the same technical skill, this other woman had a better attitude and that I would be able to work with her in a congenial way. And after she stopped working for me, she went off to do something else. We were still friends,
Hmm.
remained
Hmm.
friends because we developed a bond from being around one another. This other woman had this attitude that she was terrific. It's true, she had a lot of skill and she had a lot to offer, but I was smart enough to choose this other woman who I was so happy that I hired because it was a perfect choice. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of that goes into it. And you can evaluate people using this book and make that decision. Do I want to really be around this person, a vengeful person, or do I want to be around a transcendent person? So again, there are 35 scales. You have all kinds of ways to evaluate people. And I urge you to use this material because it will save you a lot of trouble. It will move your life forward. And every single person who's ever read this book has had a positive reaction. They all say something like, wow, this blew me away. Now, I don't speak that way. That is what they tell me.
Oh, just read your reviews.
So it's because, yeah, it's because the book is natural law, like the Pythagorean theorem. The Pythagorean theorem was true before Earth existed, and it will still be true after Earth ceases to exist. Now, Pythagoras was one of the great geniuses of ancient Greece. Most people don't
Greece.
know that,
Mhm.
they just know him
Right.
from the theorem. But he was a true genius. He discovered this and he wrote it down, and he handed it down to us. 2,500 years later, we're still using it. You know why?
Sure.
It's natural law, just like the
And
two
that's
laws of motion. Now, until Isaac Newton articulated them, nobody else had figured them out.
but they're still
Now,
the law.
as a student of natural law, I can tell you, they almost seem like common sense to me. And what I'm saying is, they're so axiomatically true, I can imagine how they would not be true. So when you get something that's natural law, it has that power, it has that gravitas. And it's
Yes.
very
Yeah.
easy to see. Like when I first learned the Pythagorean theorem, I don't know how old I was a kid. Maybe it was in grammar school. I thought, yes, I see this.
Makes
And
sense.
I used it all the time as a mathematician through 26 semesters of math. Every time this came up, I used it. So that is what this book is for. A situation comes up. Let's say you meet a woman, right? and you say, well, do I really want to get serious about this woman? I would urge you to find her on these scales. Don't tell her, just analyze it. And then it will be easy for you to say, yes, this is somebody I could marry. Or no, this is somebody I don't want to be around. Even though she's pretty, even though she likes me, even though she drives a Jaguar, I don't want to be around this person. And that will
Well,
save you a lot of trouble.
I tell you where leaders probably will find the book worth 10,000 times its value is in the hiring process. The way you laid that out, the way the book lays it out, if I just apply that to my hiring process, I will complete a great team. I do want to be really respectful of your time. You've been with us for a while, and I appreciate that. But I do want to ask you something real quick here, just because sometimes I think it's important for me to say, what questions did I not ask you that I should have asked you?
A good question is, how can one use Septemics to improve oneself and one's life? And
Okay.
I can give you a concise answer to that. So if you study the scales carefully and use them to resolve your confusions and dilemmas, your life will improve. The more carefully you study them and the more diligently and frequently you apply them, the more benefit you'll receive. Whenever a situation or question arises in your life, turn to the appropriate chapter and analyze the situation against the relevant scale. Now, sometimes there are several relevant scales. Sometimes there are 3 or 4 or 5 that will be applicable to that situation. Go through each relevant scale and find your level on each, either generally or as regards some specific context. For example, the scale of basic purposes. Every human being has one basic purpose, and in most cases, it lasts your entire life. When you find that's it, you're done. Now you can find other people's basic purposes, but yours, that's it for that scale. But you go to another scale, like, for example, the scale of motivation, you could use that hundreds of times. You can say, you meet a girl, oh, what's her motivation? Is she after me because I'm rich? Is she after me because she loves me? Is she after me because she wants to get even with me because she hates men? You follow me? Using the scale of motivation. So if you can get to the truth of that, that really informs you, okay? And you're using it to improve your life. Now, once you find your level, you can move up to the next level. You get the idea of being at the next level. You can ask, how would that manifest? How would that be if I were at this next level? And then work out a plan for how you would move up. And if you're correct about what level you are in, it will not be very difficult to figure out what to do and move up the level. If you can't work out how to get to the next level, usually it's because either you're actually at a different level than the one you think, or you have not fully comprehended the text. So go back and restudy it. But if you do these steps thoroughly for each scale, you will undergo a metamorphosis. If you
Cool.
find your level on all 35 scales, by the time you get to the end, you will be a new person.
I can see that. I can see that. One final question for you, if you have time. What projects are you
Yes,
working on right now? What projects are you working on right now to help leaders be better? We'll talk about the book again, where to get the book, but are you working on any particular project that can help leaders be better?
I really am overwhelmed promoting this book, doing interviews. I've done something like 78 interviews. Some of them are more time consuming than others because the
Hmm.
interview itself is the easy part. But connecting with the person and going back and forth and setting it up, getting the right
Yeah.
technology, it's very time consuming. And it's also tiring. So that's really, last week I did a live presentation. So obviously that killed a whole evening. I had to drive there and I had to get up on stage, and then afterwards I had to go around, answer questions, and then I had to sign books, killed a whole night. So I really have my hands full right now promoting this book
Okay.
because lots of people want to find out about this. And my motivation is to get this information into the hands of people who want to improve themselves. Because I have been told continuously from people who've read this book, this has helped me. This works. This is resolving my dilemmas. And so I had a career helping people. In fact, I've been helping people since I was a kid. I was an altar boy when I was 10, 11, 12, 13. That was my way of helping people at that age. Okay. I've done a lot of tutoring and counseling, and so I've had a lifetime of helping people. And so now this book can go where I can never go. This book can go all over the world. And I talk to people in Africa, India, Australia, Europe, as well as the United States. And anybody who can speak English can interview me, can read this book, and can help himself. So that's my mission, because there are 1.5 billion people who speak English.
Yeah.
57% of the human race wants to improve themselves or their lives.
But hi.
There are something like 700 million people who can use this book
To benefit from
to
it.
their
Yeah.
advantage.
Okay. So tell us,
So
promote it real
that's my
quick.
mission, is to get it out there.
So promote it again for us real fast. Tell us where to get it. You mentioned Amazon, and just give us the whole ball game.
The
And
best
I'll be
thing is to go to my website.
okay.
Go to my website. Many people have told me what a good website it is. It tells you what the readers have said, what the journalists have written, what the reviews have been, and you can read sections of the book. And my contact information is there. So if you want to call me up or send me an email and say, what did you mean on page 67, paragraph 2? You can do that, and I'll tell you. So go to my website. And it tells you that you can get the book from Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and the publisher. But to tell you the truth, this book is easy to find. Just put Septemics into a search engine and you'll find thousands of companies that are selling this book. It's not hard to find.
I got to tell you, sir, I appreciate your time, your effort, and your energy. I realize doing podcasts sometimes is a long payoff before it pays off before you sell 15 books, or whatever it is. But I appreciate you taking the time. I think it's been very educational. It has opened up some sources of thinking for other people. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.